The morning fog hung thick around Buckingham Palace as James Morrison began his usual patrol. He had been a royal guard for 12 years, and every corner of the palace grounds was as familiar to him as his own home. The early hours were always quiet, with only the sound of his boots echoing against the ancient stone corridors. James took pride in his work. He knew every routine, every schedule, and every person who belonged in these hallowed halls. Today felt different, though. There was an unusual tension in the air that he couldn't quite place. The staff seemed more hurried than usual, and whispered conversations stopped abruptly when he passed by. As he rounded the corner near the Queen's private chambers, something caught his eye. The door to the late Queen's personal treasure room was slightly ajar. This was highly irregular. The room had been sealed since Her Majesty's passing, and only a select few individuals had access to it. James felt his pulse quicken as he approached the door cautiously. Through the narrow opening, he could see movement inside. Someone was definitely in there, but the lighting was dim and he couldn't make out who it was. James positioned himself carefully, ensuring he remained hidden while getting a better view. His training kicked in immediately. Years of protecting the royal family had taught him to observe first and act second. The figure inside was bent over an ornate cabinet, carefully handling what appeared to be jewelry. James squinted in the low light, trying to identify the person. The movements were deliberate and practiced, suggesting this wasn't a random intruder. Whoever was in there knew exactly what they were looking for and where to find it. As the person turned slightly, James caught a glimpse of their profile. His heart nearly stopped. It was Camilla, the Queen consort. But what was she doing in the late Queen's private treasure room at this early hour, and why was the room supposed to be sealed? James felt confused and concerned. This didn't make sense according to the protocols he knew. Camilla was carefully examining each piece before placing some items into a small velvet bag. Her movements were quick but precise, as if she was working against time. James noticed she kept glancing toward the door, clearly concerned about being discovered. This behavior struck him as odd for someone who should have legitimate access to royal properties. James remained frozen in position, unsure of what to do next. On one hand, Camilla was family now and might have valid reasons for being there. On the other hand, the secretive nature of her actions and the fact that the room was supposedly off-limits made him deeply uncomfortable. His duty was to protect the royal family and their possessions, but from whom when a family member appeared to be the one acting suspiciously? The weight of what he was witnessing began to settle on James's shoulders. These weren't just any treasures. These were the late Queen's most personal and valuable possessions, items that held immense sentimental and historical value. Some of the pieces he could see were gifts from foreign dignitaries, family heirlooms passed down through generations, and jewelry that had been photographed countless times adorning the beloved monarch. As Camilla continued her careful selection, James made a mental note of everything he observed. His training had taught him to be thorough in his observations, and he instinctively began cataloging details that might be important later. The time, the specific items being handled, Camilla's demeanor, and the unusual circumstances surrounding the entire situation. The morning light was beginning to filter through the palace windows more strongly now, and James knew that soon the corridors would be filled with staff beginning their daily routines. Whatever was happening in that room needed to be resolved quickly, or it would become much more complicated. James found himself at a crossroads, knowing that his next decision could have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. Camilla suddenly straightened up and moved toward the door. James quickly stepped back into the shadows, his heart pounding. He watched as she peered out into the corridor, checking to ensure no one was around. After a moment, she slipped out of the room, carefully closing the door behind her, and walking briskly down the corridor in the opposite direction from where James was hiding. James waited several minutes before approaching the door to the treasure room. He tested the handle and found it locked again as if nothing had happened. But he knew what he had seen, and the implications were staggering. The question now was what he should do with this information, and who he could trust with such a sensitive matter. James spent the rest of his shift in a daze, replaying the morning's events over and over in his mind. Every detail seemed important now, from the way Camilla had handled the jewelry to the nervous glances she made toward the door. He tried to focus on his regular duties, but his thoughts kept returning to what he had witnessed in the treasure room. By afternoon, James knew he couldn't keep this information to himself. The weight of the secret was becoming unbearable, and he realized that his duty to the royal family extended beyond just physical protection. If valuable items were being taken without proper authorization, it was his responsibility to report it. Regardless of who was involved, James decided to approach his supervisor, Captain William Hayes, a man he had worked with for over 8 years. Captain Hayes was known for his discretion and fair judgment, qualities that would be essential in handling such a delicate situation. James requested a private meeting, citing an urgent security matter that required immediate attention. In the privacy of Captain Hayes's office, James carefully recounted everything he had observed that morning. He was methodical in his description, sticking to facts and avoiding speculation about motives or intentions. Captain Hayes listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each detail James provided. "Are you absolutely certain it was the Queen Consort?" Captain Hayes asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The gravity of the accusation was not lost on either man. James nodded firmly, explaining that he had gotten a clear view of her profile and that her distinctive appearance made identification certain. Captain Hayes leaned back in his chair, clearly troubled by the information. He had served the royal family for over 2 decades and had never encountered a situation quite like this. The protocols for handling potential misconduct within the royal family were complex and politically sensitive. One wrong move could create a scandal that would damage the monarchy's reputation irreparably. "We need to investigate this matter thoroughly before taking any action," Captain Hayes decided. "I want you to write a detailed report of everything you observed, including exact times, descriptions of the items you saw, and Camilla's behavior. Leave nothing out, no matter how insignificant it might seem." James spent the next 2 hours writing his report, carefully documenting every aspect of the incident. As he wrote, he remembered additional details that seemed important. The specific jewelry pieces, the type of bag Camilla had used, and even the way she had locked the door afterward. Each detail painted a clearer picture of what had transpired. Meanwhile, Captain Hayes began his own discreet inquiries. He contacted the palace's head of security and the keeper of the royal collection to understand the current status of the late Queen's treasures. What he learned was disturbing. According to official records, the treasure room remained sealed, pending a complete inventory of its contents, a process that was not scheduled to begin for several more weeks. The keeper of the royal collection, Margaret Thompson, confirmed that no one should have access to the room at this time. She explained that the inventory process was being handled with extreme care due to the historical and monetary value of the items involved. Any removal of objects before the official inventory would be highly irregular and potentially problematic. Captain Hayes also learned that there had been some discussion among senior palace officials about how to handle the late Queen's personal jewelry collection. Some pieces were destined for museums, others would remain with the royal family, and a few items had specific bequests in the Queen's will. However, these decisions were still being finalized by lawyers and palace administrators. As the investigation progressed, Captain Hayes discovered something else troubling. The security logs showed that Camilla's access card had been used to enter restricted areas of the palace on 3 separate occasions over the past 2 weeks, always during early morning hours when few staff members were present. This pattern suggested that the incident James witnessed was not an isolated occurrence. The captain decided to review security footage from the cameras positioned near the treasure room. While the room itself was not under video surveillance out of respect for privacy, the corridors leading to it were monitored. The footage would either confirm or contradict James's account of events. Late that evening, Captain Hayes and James sat together reviewing the security footage. The timestamp showed 6:47 a.m., exactly when James had reported seeing Camilla. The video clearly showed her approaching the treasure room, disappearing from view for approximately 25 minutes, and then leaving with what appeared to be a small bag in her hand. The evidence was now undeniable. Camilla had indeed accessed the sealed treasure room and removed items from it without authorization. The question now was how to handle this information responsibly, while maintaining the dignity and reputation of the royal family. Captain Hayes knew that the next steps would require involving higher authorities within the palace hierarchy. James, you've done the right thing by reporting this, Captain Hayes said solemnly. However, I need you to understand that this matter is now classified at the highest level. You cannot discuss this with anyone else until we determine the appropriate course of action. The integrity of our investigation and the stability of the monarchy depend on complete discretion. James nodded his understanding, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger. The royal family was about to face a crisis that could shake the very foundations of the institution, and he had inadvertently become a key witness in what might become the biggest scandal in recent royal history. The following morning brought an unexpected development that would escalate the investigation beyond anything Captain Hayes had anticipated. Margaret Thompson, the keeper of the royal collection, arrived at his office with disturbing news that would change everything about how they viewed the situation. Captain Hayes, I've discovered something that makes our current investigation even more serious, Margaret said, her voice shaking slightly. She had clearly been upset about something and had rushed to share her findings. After our conversation yesterday, I decided to conduct a preliminary check of some inventory records from the late Queen's collection. Margaret explained that she had access to detailed photographs and descriptions of many items in the treasure room, documents that had been prepared for insurance purposes over the years. While she couldn't enter the sealed room yet, she could cross-reference these records with reports from other palace staff who had noticed missing items from related collections. 3 separate staff members have approached me in the past week about missing pieces from various royal collections. Margaret continued, At first I thought it might be confusion during the transition period after the Queen's passing, but now I believe these disappearances might be connected to what your guard witnessed. The missing items were significant. A diamond bracelet that had been a wedding gift to the late Queen, a rare emerald necklace with historical provenance, and a set of antique pearl earrings that had belonged to Queen Victoria. Each piece was worth hundreds of thousands of pounds and held immense historical value beyond their monetary worth. Captain Hayes felt the weight of the situation intensifying. What had initially appeared to be a single incident was now looking like a pattern of systematic removal of royal treasures. The implications were staggering, not just for the royal family's reputation, but potentially for national heritage and cultural preservation. We need to expand our investigation immediately, Captain Hayes decided. I want a complete review of all security footage from the past month, focusing on early morning and late evening hours when Camilla's access card was used. We also need to document every missing item and establish a timeline for when they disappeared. Meanwhile, James continued his regular duties while carrying the heavy burden of what he knew. He found himself paying closer attention to everyone's behavior around the palace, wondering if other staff members had noticed anything suspicious but hadn't reported it. The palace was a complex ecosystem of hundreds of employees, and information often traveled through unofficial channels. During his afternoon patrol, James encountered Sarah Williams, a housekeeping supervisor who had worked at the palace for 15 years. Sarah had always been friendly and observant, qualities that made her an excellent source of information about daily palace operations. James decided to carefully probe for any unusual observations without revealing the specific nature of his investigation. Sarah, have you noticed anything different around the palace lately? James asked casually as they crossed paths in one of the main corridors. I mean, since the Queen's passing, has anything seemed out of place to you? Sarah paused thoughtfully before responding. Well, now that you mention it, there have been a few odd things. I've noticed some rooms that should be locked have been left open occasionally, and some of the cleaning schedules have been disrupted in areas where they're usually very consistent. Why do you ask? James maintained his casual tone while pressing for more details. Sarah revealed that she had found doors unlocked in restricted areas on at least 2 occasions, always during early morning hours. She had assumed it was due to confusion during the transition period, but the incidents had stuck in her memory because they were so unusual. There's something else, Sarah added, lowering her voice. Some of the other housekeeping staff have mentioned seeing someone moving around in areas where they wouldn't normally expect to find anyone at unusual hours. We've all been working different schedules lately, so we thought it might just be confusion. But maybe it's worth looking into. This information provided additional confirmation that something systematic had been happening. James thanked Sarah for her observations and made mental notes to share this information with Captain Hayes. The investigation was revealing a pattern of activity that extended beyond the single incident he had witnessed. Later that day, Captain Hayes received a call that would bring the investigation to a critical juncture. The palace's head of security, Sir Richard Blackwood, requested an immediate meeting to discuss what he termed irregularities in access patterns and potential security breaches. The investigation was about to reach the highest levels of palace authority. Sir Richard had been conducting his own review of security protocols following the Queen's passing and had identified several concerning patterns. Camilla's access card usage was just one of several anomalies that had caught his attention. When combined with reports of missing items and unusual staff observations, a clear picture was emerging of unauthorized activities within the palace. Captain Hayes, I understand you've been investigating some security concerns, Sir Richard said when they met in his office. I believe our separate investigations have uncovered the same issues, and it's time we coordinate our efforts to address this situation properly. The meeting between Captain Hayes and Sir Richard marked a turning point in the investigation. What had started as a single guard's observation was now a full palace security review involving multiple departments and senior officials. The scope of the potential misconduct was becoming clear, and difficult decisions would need to be made about how to proceed. Sir Richard explained that he had already begun discreet inquiries with legal experts about the proper procedures for handling such matters. The royal family's reputation, the integrity of the monarchy, and the preservation of national treasures were all at stake. Every action from this point forward would need to be carefully considered and properly documented. We're going to need to confront this situation directly, Sir Richard concluded, but we must do so in a way that protects the institution while ensuring that proper justice is served. This is no longer just a security matter. It's become a constitutional issue that could have far-reaching consequences for the monarchy itself. The investigation entered a new phase when Sir Richard Blackwood made the difficult decision to involve the Metropolitan Police's Specialist Art and Antiquities Unit. The value and historical significance of the missing items meant that this was no longer just an internal palace matter. Detective Inspector Catherine Reynolds was assigned to lead the police investigation while working closely with palace security. Detective Inspector Reynolds had 20 years of experience investigating art theft and fraud cases involving high-value cultural artifacts. She understood the delicate nature of the situation and the need for absolute discretion while conducting a thorough investigation. Her first step was to meet with Captain Hayes and James to review all the evidence that had been gathered so far. I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with here, Detective Reynolds explained during their meeting. The evidence you've provided is compelling, but we need to build a complete case that will stand up to scrutiny. This means documenting everything properly and following strict legal procedures every step of the way. The detective's approach was methodical and professional. She reviewed all security footage, examined the access card records, and studied the inventory reports that Margaret Thompson had compiled. She also interviewed the housekeeping staff who had reported unusual observations, carefully documenting their statements and corroborating their accounts with physical evidence. One significant breakthrough came when Detective Reynolds discovered that several of the missing items had appeared in recent auction house catalogs. High-end auction houses in London had listed pieces that matched exactly with descriptions from the royal collection. The timing of these listings coincided perfectly with the periods when items had gone missing from the palace. This changes everything, Detective Reynolds told Sir Richard during their update meeting. If these items are being sold through legitimate auction houses, it suggests a level of planning and organization that goes beyond simple theft. Someone with knowledge of the art market and access to proper authentication channels is involved. The auction house evidence provided a crucial lead. Detective Reynolds contacted the auction houses directly, presenting her credentials and requesting information about the consignment of the suspicious items. The responses she received were both shocking and enlightening. The auction houses confirmed that the items had been consigned by someone claiming to represent the royal family, with proper documentation suggesting they were authorized disposals from the royal collection. The consignor had provided what appeared to be legitimate paperwork and had answered all authentication questions correctly, leading the auction houses to believe the consignments were legal and authorized. This revelation meant that whoever was taking the items from the palace was not just stealing them, but was actively working to sell them through legitimate channels using forged or fraudulent documentation. The sophistication of the operation suggested careful planning and considerable knowledge of both royal procedures and the art market. Detective Reynolds decided it was time to conduct a controlled observation operation. Working with palace security, she arranged for discreet surveillance of the treasure room and surrounding areas during the early morning hours when previous incidents had occurred. Advanced surveillance equipment was installed in locations that would capture any unauthorized activity without alerting potential perpetrators. The surveillance operation was planned for a 2-week period, with teams of officers and palace security personnel working in shifts to maintain continuous monitoring. James was assigned to continue his regular patrol duties, but was equipped with a discreet communication device that would allow him to alert the surveillance team immediately if he observed anything suspicious. On the 4th night of the surveillance operation, their patience was rewarded. At approximately 6:30 a.m., the monitoring equipment detected movement in the corridor leading to the treasure room. The surveillance team watched as a figure approached the room, used an access card to enter, and remained inside for nearly 30 minutes before emerging with what appeared to be a small package. The high-definition cameras captured clear images of Camilla entering and leaving the treasure room. More importantly, they recorded her opening what appeared to be a concealed compartment within the room and removing several items that she carefully placed in a padded envelope. The footage provided irrefutable evidence of the ongoing unauthorized access and removal of royal treasures. Detective Reynolds immediately ordered discreet tracking of Camilla's movements after she left the palace. The surveillance team followed her to an upscale area of London, where she entered a building that housed several businesses, including a high-end jewelry appraiser and a private art dealer. She remained inside for approximately 45 minutes before returning to her vehicle and driving back towards central London. The investigation team later learned that the building Camilla had visited was home to Marcus Wellington, a respected art dealer who specialized in historical jewelry and royal artifacts. Wellington had an impeccable reputation and had previously worked with several royal families across Europe. His involvement suggested that the operation was even more sophisticated than they had initially suspected. "We now have clear evidence of ongoing criminal activity," Detective Reynolds reported to Sir Richard. "The surveillance footage shows deliberate and repeated theft of royal property, and the connection to professional art dealers suggests this is part of a larger scheme to profit from these stolen items." The detective explained that they now had enough evidence to make arrests, but the sensitive nature of the case required careful consideration of how to proceed. Arresting a member of the royal family would create an unprecedented situation that could have far-reaching consequences for the monarchy and the country as a whole. Sir Richard convened an emergency meeting with the palace's senior legal advisors and communications specialists to discuss how to handle the situation. The evidence was overwhelming, but the implications of taking action against the Queen Consort were staggering. Every decision from this point forward would need to balance the demands of justice with the stability of the monarchy. "We're facing a constitutional crisis unlike anything in modern royal history," Sir Richard observed grimly. "Whatever we decide to do next will have consequences that extend far beyond this investigation. We need to proceed with extreme caution while ensuring that justice is served and the integrity of the royal collection is protected." The investigation had reached a critical juncture where evidence gathering was complete, but the most difficult decision still lay ahead. The next phase would require confronting Camilla directly and determining how to resolve the situation in a way that served both justice and the broader interests of the monarchy. The decision to confront Camilla required weeks of careful planning and consultation with the highest levels of government. Sir Richard worked closely with the Prime Minister's office, senior legal experts, and constitutional scholars to determine the proper approach for handling such an unprecedented situation. The monarchy had never faced anything quite like this in modern times. King Charles III was informed of the situation during a private meeting with Sir Richard and the palace's most senior legal advisor. The king's reaction was one of shock and profound disappointment, but he understood the gravity of the situation and the need for proper legal procedures to be followed regardless of personal relationships or family considerations. The integrity of the monarchy and the rule of law must be preserved, The king stated firmly during the briefing. If these allegations are true, then appropriate action must be taken regardless of the personal cost to our family. The British people's trust in the institution is more important than protecting any individual, including members of my own family. The king's position made it clear that the investigation should proceed according to legal requirements. However, he requested that every effort be made to handle the matter with dignity and to minimize the potential damage to the monarchy's reputation. A careful balance would need to be struck between justice and institutional preservation. Detective Reynolds, working with palace security and legal experts, developed a plan for confronting Camilla with the evidence. The approach would be formal but respectful, conducted in private within the palace to avoid public speculation or media attention. The goal was to give Camilla an opportunity to explain her actions and potentially cooperate with the investigation. The confrontation was scheduled for a Wednesday morning when Camilla's calendar showed she would be at the palace for routine engagements. Sir Richard, Detective Reynolds, and the palace's chief legal advisor would present the evidence and formally request an explanation for her actions. The meeting would be recorded to ensure accurate documentation of her response. On the morning of the confrontation, Camilla arrived at the palace as scheduled, unaware of what awaited her. She was escorted to a private meeting room where Sir Richard, Detective Reynolds, and the legal advisor were waiting. The atmosphere was formal and serious, immediately signaling to Camilla that this was not a routine palace meeting. Your Majesty, we need to discuss some serious security concerns that have come to our attention, Sir Richard began carefully. We have evidence of unauthorized access to restricted areas of the palace and the removal of items from the late Queen's collection. We believe you may have information that could help us understand these incidents. Camilla's initial reaction was surprise and indignation. She questioned why she was being treated like a suspect and demanded to know what evidence they claimed to have. Her demeanor suggested either genuine surprise at the accusations or skillful acting designed to deflect suspicion from her actions. Detective Reynolds took over the questioning, presenting the evidence in a systematic and professional manner. She showed Camilla the security footage of her entering and leaving the treasure room, the access card records showing her presence in restricted areas during unusual hours, and photographs of items from royal auctions that matched pieces from the missing inventory. As the evidence was presented, Camilla's expression changed from indignation to concern, and eventually to what appeared to be resignation. The weight of the documentation was overwhelming, and her initial denials became less confident as each piece of evidence was revealed. The surveillance footage in particular was impossible to dispute or explain away. I think you should know that we've also identified the art dealer you've been working with, Detective Reynolds added. Marcus Wellington has been cooperative with our investigation and has provided information about the items you consigned to him. We have a complete picture of the scope of these activities. This revelation seemed to break Camilla's resolve completely. The mention of Wellington's cooperation made it clear that denial was no longer a viable strategy. She realized that the investigation had uncovered the full extent of her activities, and that continued denials would only make the situation worse for everyone involved. After a long pause, Camilla began to explain her actions. Her story was complex and involved financial pressures that she claimed had developed following her marriage into the royal family. She explained that maintaining the lifestyle expected of a royal consort required significant personal expenses that weren't fully covered by official allowances. I never intended for this to become such a serious matter, Camilla said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought these items were sitting unused and that no one would notice if a few pieces were quietly sold. I told myself I was just accessing items that would eventually be distributed anyway. But I realize now how wrong I was. Camilla's explanation revealed a pattern of rationalization that had allowed her to justify increasingly serious thefts over time. What had started as taking small, seemingly insignificant items had escalated to removing major pieces from the royal collection. She had convinced herself that she was borrowing rather than stealing, and that the items would never be missed. The legal advisor explained to Camilla the serious nature of the charges she was facing. Theft from the royal collection was not just a criminal matter, but could potentially be considered treason under certain interpretations of British law. The value of the stolen items and their historical significance made this a case that could result in substantial prison time if prosecuted fully. Detective Reynolds informed Camilla that she would need to be formally arrested and charged, but arrangements would be made to handle the process as discreetly as possible, out of respect for the royal family and the monarchy as an institution. However, the legal process would need to proceed according to standard procedures regardless of her royal status. "I understand the position I've put everyone in," Camilla said finally. "I'm prepared to cooperate fully with the investigation and to help recover any items that can still be retrieved. I realize that my actions have damaged not just my own reputation, but potentially the monarchy itself, and I deeply regret that." The confrontation had achieved its primary objectives. Camilla had acknowledged her actions, provided information about the scope of her activities, and agreed to cooperate with efforts to recover stolen items. However, the difficult work of managing the legal and public relations consequences of the situation was just beginning. The aftermath of Camilla's confession created an unprecedented crisis that required immediate and careful management at the highest levels of government and the royal household. Within hours of the confrontation, emergency meetings were convened involving the king, the prime minister, senior cabinet members, and constitutional experts to determine how to handle the situation. The first priority was damage control. The palace's communications team worked around the clock to develop a strategy that would minimize harm to the monarchy while ensuring transparency about the legal proceedings. The challenge was enormous: how to maintain public trust in the royal family while acknowledging that one of its most prominent members had committed serious crimes. King Charles faced the most difficult decision of his reign. His wife had confessed to stealing irreplaceable national treasures, and the evidence was overwhelming. Despite the personal cost, he knew that justice had to be served and that the monarchy's integrity depended on handling the situation properly. The king's advisors presented him with several options, each carrying significant risks and consequences. The legal process moved forward with careful attention to both justice and constitutional considerations. Camilla was formally arrested and charged with theft, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft of national heritage items. The charges were serious enough to carry substantial prison sentences, but arrangements were made to handle her custody and court appearances with appropriate dignity. Meanwhile, Detective Reynolds led efforts to recover the stolen items and trace the full extent of the theft network. Working with Marcus Wellington, who had agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation, they were able to identify buyers of several pieces and began the complex process of recovering items that had been sold through various channels. The recovery operation revealed the true scope of Camilla's activities. Over 18 months, she had systematically removed over 40 items from the royal collection, with a combined value exceeding £10 million. Some pieces had been sold to private collectors, others were being held by auction houses, and a few remained in Wellington's possession awaiting sale. James Morrison, the guard whose observation had started the investigation, found himself in an unusual position as a key witness in one of the most significant royal scandals in modern history. His testimony would be crucial in the legal proceedings, and he was assigned protection to ensure his safety and ability to testify freely about what he had observed. The recovery efforts had mixed success. About 60% of the stolen items were eventually recovered, but several pieces had been sold to private collectors who were either unwilling or unable to return them. Some items had already left the country, making recovery extremely difficult despite international cooperation from law enforcement agencies. The legal proceedings moved through the courts with unprecedented media attention despite efforts to maintain some privacy for the royal family. Camilla's guilty plea helped expedite the process, but the sentencing phase required careful consideration of factors that had never before been relevant in a case involving a member of the royal family. During the sentencing hearing, Camilla's lawyers argued for leniency based on her cooperation with the investigation, her lack of prior criminal history, and the unique pressures she faced as a member of the royal family. The prosecution, however, emphasized the severity of the crimes and the breach of trust that her actions represented to the British people. The judge faced an extraordinary situation in determining an appropriate sentence. Traditional sentencing guidelines suggested substantial prison time, but the unique circumstances of the case and the defendant's status required careful consideration of broader implications for the monarchy and the country. In his sentencing remarks, the judge acknowledged the unprecedented nature of the case while emphasizing that no one, regardless of status, was above the law. He sentenced Camilla to 4 years in prison, with the possibility of early release after 2 years based on good behavior and continued cooperation with recovery efforts. The sentence sent shockwaves through the royal family and the nation. For the first time in modern history, a senior member of the royal family would serve a prison sentence for criminal activity. The implications for the monarchy's reputation and future were profound and would require years of careful rehabilitation. King Charles addressed the nation in a televised speech following the sentencing. His words were carefully chosen to acknowledge the gravity of the situation while reaffirming his commitment to the principles of justice and the rule of law that formed the foundation of the constitutional monarchy. The events of recent months have been deeply painful for our family and, I know, disappointing for the people of Britain, the king said in his address. However, they have also demonstrated that our system of justice applies equally to all citizens, regardless of position or status. The monarchy will emerge from this crisis stronger and more committed than ever to serving the people with integrity and honor. The king announced that he and Camilla would divorce, and that she would renounce all royal titles and privileges, following her release from prison. These decisions, while personally devastating, were necessary to preserve the integrity of the monarchy and begin the process of rebuilding public trust. The scandal had far-reaching consequences beyond the immediate legal proceedings. Parliament initiated a review of security procedures for royal collections, and new protocols were established to prevent similar incidents in the future. The episode also sparked broader discussions about the financing of the royal family and the pressures faced by members who marry into the monarchy. For James Morrison, the guard whose vigilance had uncovered the scandal, life changed dramatically. He was commended for his professionalism and dedication to duty, but he also faced the challenge of continuing his career in an environment forever changed by the events he had witnessed. His actions had helped preserve invaluable national treasures and maintain the integrity of the monarchy, but at considerable personal and professional cost. 2 years later, the royal family and the nation were still recovering from the scandal that had shaken the monarchy to its core. The palace had implemented comprehensive security reforms, and new procedures ensured that such systematic theft could never happen again. The royal collection had been completely re-inventoried, and every item was now tracked with advanced security measures. James Morrison had become something of a reluctant hero in the aftermath of the scandal. His dedication to duty and keen observation had prevented even greater losses to the national heritage. He had been promoted to senior security officer, and was now responsible for training new guards in observation techniques and proper reporting procedures. His experience had become a cornerstone of the palace's updated security protocols. The recovered royal treasures had been restored and were now displayed in a special exhibition at the Tower of London, telling the story of their recovery and emphasizing the importance of protecting Britain's cultural heritage. The exhibition had become one of the most popular tourist attractions in London, drawing visitors from around the world who wanted to see the recovered pieces and learn about their remarkable journey. King Charles had worked tirelessly to rebuild the monarchy's reputation following the scandal. His commitment to transparency and justice during the crisis had actually strengthened public support for the institution in many ways. Opinion polls showed that while the scandal had initially damaged the royal family's standing, the king's handling of the situation had ultimately increased respect for his leadership and integrity. Camilla was released from prison after serving 2 years of her sentence. As anticipated for good behavior and continued cooperation with authorities, she had spent her time in prison quietly, avoiding media attention and working on rehabilitation programs. Upon her release, she moved to a private residence in Scotland, far from public view, and maintained no contact with the royal family. The divorce proceedings had been finalized during Camilla's imprisonment, and she had formally renounced all royal titles and privileges. She was now a private citizen, living on a modest pension and facing the challenge of rebuilding her life away from the public eye. The media had largely respected her privacy during this transition, understanding that continued attention would serve no constructive purpose. Detective Inspector Catherine Reynolds had received commendations for her handling of the sensitive investigation. Her careful balance of thoroughness and discretion had become a model for handling high-profile cases involving public figures. She had been promoted and now headed a specialized unit dealing with cultural heritage crimes, using the experience gained from the royal case to protect other important collections. Marcus Wellington, the art dealer who had unknowingly participated in the scheme, had cooperated fully with authorities and avoided criminal charges. However, his reputation in the art world had suffered significantly, and he had been forced to close his business. He now worked as a consultant helping law enforcement agencies identify stolen artwork and prevent similar crimes. The palace's security review had revealed other vulnerabilities that extended beyond the treasure rooms. Comprehensive reforms had been implemented throughout the royal residences, including updated access control systems, enhanced surveillance measures, and improved staff training programs. These changes ensured that the royal family and their collections were better protected than ever before. Parliament's investigation into royal financing had resulted in new transparency measures and clearer guidelines for royal family expenses. The changes addressed some of the financial pressures that Camilla had claimed motivated her actions, while also ensuring greater accountability for public funds used to support the monarchy. For the staff at Buckingham Palace, the scandal had been a profound learning experience about the importance of vigilance and proper reporting procedures. The culture of discretion that had traditionally protected royal privacy was balanced with new requirements for transparency when potential misconduct was observed. Staff members were now better equipped to handle situations where duty conflicted with personal relationships or loyalty. The broader art and auction world had also learned important lessons from the scandal. New verification procedures were implemented to prevent the sale of stolen cultural heritage items, and international cooperation between law enforcement agencies was strengthened to track and recover stolen artwork more effectively. James Morrison often reflected on that foggy morning when he first observed something unusual near the treasure room. His decision to investigate further and report what he had seen had prevented immeasurable damage to Britain's cultural heritage. While the personal cost to those involved had been enormous, the preservation of these national treasures for future generations made his actions worthwhile. The late Queen's jewelry collection, now secure and properly protected, continued to serve as a symbol of British history and cultural continuity. The pieces that had been recovered told stories that spanned generations, connecting the present monarchy to centuries of tradition and heritage. Their preservation ensured that future generations would be able to appreciate these links to their history. As James completed his evening patrol of the palace grounds, he took satisfaction in knowing that the royal collections were now better protected than ever before. The security measures he had helped implement would safeguard these treasures for generations to come. The scandal had been painful for everyone involved, but it had ultimately strengthened the monarchy's commitment to transparency, justice, and the preservation of Britain's cultural heritage. The monarchy had survived its greatest crisis in modern times and emerged with renewed purpose and stronger foundations. King Charles continued his reign with the respect of his people, having demonstrated that no one was above the law and that the institution's integrity was more important than protecting any individual, regardless of their position or relationship to the crown. The story that began with a guard's keen observation had ultimately reinforced the principles that made the British monarchy endure: duty, service, and the rule of law. These values had been tested by the crisis but had proven strong enough to preserve the institution for future generations. The royal treasures were safe, the monarchy was secure, and the British people's trust in their constitutional system had been renewed through the principled handling of an unprecedented challenge.